Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land 2. In the last one we finished off our duties over in alternate chapter 3, and now it's time for us to go after alternate chapter 5. So, both of the latter two alternate chapters are located in chapter 4, technically. But despite being further down on the treasure map, we're going after the one that's here in chapter 4, story 5, rather than chapter 4, story 4. Why? Well, if you recall earlier in the LP, I noted that the panel pieces get placed in set positions depending on what level they're from. Effectively, they're counted by the level's number internally in some regards, I guess. Despite being placed higher on the map, the panel pieces from the levels that we get off of the offshoot from Chapter 4, Story 4 are numbered effectively 46 through 50. We would skip 5 in the order. So if I want to get all the panel pieces in order, which is just a very minor thing, that I feel like is more satisfying to me, we want to go over here to Chapter 4, Story 5 and go to that alternate chapter first. The only reason I can sort of think that they may have done that in that order might be what the boss fights are at the end of those two respective alternate chapters, but it's definitely weird. So in order to access the next alternate chapter, we want to grab this spearman, and instead of heading towards where the dunk boss fight was, we want to throw him through the wall. This will very quickly reveal the alternate exit, and thus we are on to alternate chapter 5, though I guess both of the final alternate chapters are referred to as final chapter, just like the final chapter is in the main campaign. Whatever works. Let's get started. Welcome to the first alternate final chapter, Uncanny Mansion Story 1, Defeat the Giant Spearman again. So we're in a haunted house, and this first level is kind of interesting in that the main room has 4 or 5 doors in it. Over each door is an enemy profile picture, effectively. When you enter and leave one of those rooms, the enemies that are in the main room change to the ones over the door you entered. You need to use them in some form to either get through enemy blocks or figure out your way through it. There are switches in this world that can light up dark rooms and vice versa, that we're going to see pretty regularly throughout it. But also, prepare to see a lot of zombie enemies. You can use the zombie status here more than any other world, I think combined effectively. So get used to moving a little slowly and moving towards the light. Now, there is something I really do appreciate about every alternate chapter in this game. For one thing, they keep Syrup as the main villain, effectively, despite the things that happen with boss fights otherwise. But also, there's something about the energy to this entire game that feels like a Saturday morning cartoon where, yeah, no matter what, Captain Syrup's up to some shenanigans trying to steal Wario's stuff. Kind of like Team Rocket trying to steal Pikachu in every episode of Pokemon that wasn't directly like about a gym battle in some form. Up until at least roughly, I think, Gen 5, where they tried to take things a little more seriously, and then promptly changed again back to normal for Gen 6, and then Gen 7 started just changing the format entirely for the series. I think I've talked about before in my Pokemon LPs, but I've really always meant to try and marathon the entire Pokemon anime. I think the closest I've ultimately gotten in either case is getting all the way through Kanto twice. And then getting all the way through Johto twice. But then the moment that Blaziken shows up near the end of Johto, I just kind of peter off for some reason. I mean, I guess it is like, what, 200 some odd episodes at that point, but it's like, why can't I get further? Hell, thinking about it, it's even kind of applied when it comes to my LPs, hasn't it? Because I LP'd the original Gen 1, I LP'd the original Gen 2, I've done both remakes, and I've just done spin-offs otherwise. I still have not tackled a version of Hoenn in any regard, and don't worry, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire is on my list to do. I just got several other games along the way first. Still not sure which of those two versions I'm going to play, but I'm definitely doing the remake for reasons I've covered already effectively in that Heart Gold and Soul Silver LP. Well, it's mostly a Soul Silver LP, but I talk about Heart Gold along the way. If there's a level you really need to get used to kind of feeling out in the dark, though, it could be this, because there's a lot of platforming you can just trial and error in the dark by just feeling your way around. But there's times like this specific room where it's this all over the place where it's just not worth the effort in my eyes. Also, get used to these electric zapping bug enemies. I think we saw them during the main campaign. They just shoot electricity forward, but they shoot it in a waving pattern, which depending on where the bug themselves is placed, I actually find weirdly hard to avoid. But again, that's probably because I'm just trying to rush into them rather than trying to keep them in mind and move strategically. There's something about Wario Land, and I think it is largely because my first Wario Land game was 4, where I am just trying to rush things a little bit, and that's probably because of the thing that Wario Land 4 does that traumatized me as a child because of the very loud bells in that one song. But again, I'll save that for Wario Land 4. You know, also kind of thinking about it, the wackiness that early Wario Land has, but especially here in 2, really does feel like a follow-up to Super Mario Land 2. Because Mario Land 2 really did just have some really out-there level themes that were kind of weird feeling for Mario, but honestly, with the identity that the Wario Land games get, feel really in tune. Like the giant robot Mario world, the horror land, the shrunken down land, they feel like places that would be very at home in any of the given later Wario Land games. Even Wario Land 1, they would have been kind of in home. The enemy designs being a little bit out there as well really helps with that. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they just never made like a Wario or a Mario Land collection that has like Mario Land 1, 2, Wario Land 1, and maybe even like the later Game Boy Color Wario Lands, just because in retrospect there is kind of just a straightforward evolution there from mainline Mario platformer to spin-off territory in a way that's kind of fascinating. You can already see in this level, though, how they really use the ghosts as obstacles to make the zombie status ailment more of an issue than it is a helper. And it only gets worse in some levels in rooms like right here, where if you touch one of these ghosts, you have to make a trek all the way back around to get here again. And in that regard, it's easy to see the DNA where Wario and Metroid kind of shared a lot of developers early on, because there's definitely some moments, especially in Metroid 1, for one thing, but especially Super and Fusion, where messing up a puzzle really does require, like, at times a minute plus of backtracking to get back to it. Due to crumble blocks, I'm looking at you, Meridian, Super Metroid. And it's just fascinating how the dev teams are connected enough where there's probably some actual intentionality behind that. Something that Wario Land's level design lends itself pretty well to, though, with this specific aesthetic, is that it kind of feels like an evolution of the Super Mario World Ghost House mechanics and general layouts, where the exit's in a specific place, but you have to find your way through a maze of tricks at times to actually find your way to it. For instance, Story 2, hold on to the owl. Can you guess what the gimmick is here? We got the owl back again. And this can be a level that takes a while, if only because, like I believe I mentioned earlier in the LP, the owl, getting your way around with it's pretty easy, especially if you remember that the owl itself doesn't have a hitbox that can be damaged. The owl definitely feels a little slower to move around than Wario himself, if only because hazard-wise, you have to move back and forth a little more carefully to avoid getting touched by the spikes, but also the spike helicopters are placed in such a way where you really do need to, like, stop and wait for a good opportunity to move. The only real hazard that Wario himself has to worry about with that is actually these spikes that jut in and out we've seen for a lot of the game at this point. Because largely, you can just keep a good movement pace going, unless you're trying to make very specific jumps. Also, I forget exactly when it happens. It's either later in this alternate chapter or in the next one, but eventually I do realize I have enough coins saved up I can just kind of stop going for the side pathways. But also, I just kind of stopped going for them in general for two reasons. For one thing, I was getting kind of tired of the game at this point. Turns out doing a practice run of every level, and then recording the actual level, and doing that for 50 levels, takes up a lot of your time and makes you get kind of tired of the game past a certain point. But also, at this point, I was actually fighting for a little more time on my personal life. Namely, I was recording some of these stages and practicing them in the about 2 hours I have before I wake up that I go in for my work shift during the weekdays. And considering I only have another 2 hours or so, maybe 3, where I have time to do more of this from when I get home to when I usually do my stream slot, time's a little limited, and doing 100 runs of stages eats up a lot of it. So I was getting just kind of like, okay, I gotta get a move on. I gotta get to other things. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Which I hate being in that mood with some games, but that's part of why I really think they did trim down the level count of the later games, even if they're not necessarily shorter games. as it means there's more immediate intrigue in the levels. Plus, again, because there's less levels, they can put more time into those fewer levels and thus make them overall sharper feeling. But that said, what are you guys doing recently? What you been playing? I'm currently making my way through Mario & Luigi Brothership from about 30-some-odd hours in at this point. Surprisingly long for one of those games. Mind you, in retrospect, I think the other ones were usually about 25 hours-ish to begin with. It just feels like they were shorter, probably because I was younger and thus had more time to spend on them. If I ever get to an LP of it, I'll probably repeat these thoughts, but I like a lot of what it's putting down, but feels like the structure of the game with how the islands are done leads to it being kind of episodic and feeling like some things are kind of disconnected, on top of being all over the place on the pacing. But the combat system's great still, and I love the boss fights. Also, whoever decided that the music needed to be ska-based, effectively, is the smartest person alive. At the moment. For at least the next week. Definitely had a bit of a weird point in the year feeling-wise, though, where obviously there's not much of the year left to begin with. This is being recorded on November 24th, by the way. Where there's not much time in the year to begin with left, so there's not many games that can release in that time, but I genuinely can't think of an upcoming game that I'm like really saving for and looking forward to. I know there's gotta be some, there's just none coming to mind immediately. I guess what it could be is, there's some I know I'm excited for, like Metroid Prime 4, but we don't have a solid release date for it yet, so it's hard to feel directly excited because I don't know how near or far it is still technically, even if it is next year. At the least, I have a crapload of backlog games to play, because, let me see, let me look over there. My Switch backlog has 5 games on it, only one of which I've started, outside of Brothership, technically, I guess, so 6 games overall. Which, the one I've started is Octopath 2, and that's just because I started that on stream and realized, this is great, I need to not do this on stream because how I play games on those regards is so radically different. Meanwhile, my PS4/PS5 shelf, that's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. Some of which are very long RPGs like the Atelier games. Oh boy. I got the time. I got the time. I know when I would do moments like this in earlier LPs, I would like talk about how my platinum trophy process is going for some game I've been talking about in some regards lately. I still do that. For instance, I did those a lot with Yakuza. I'm still working on Yakuza 7 despite finishing that last December. Because whoever designed the numbers of that super final dungeon, I want to have a conversation with you and just ask why. That requires so much grinding compared to other RPGs I've played that it's kind of scary. And I get it standing up to certain older RPGs, like your older Dragon Quest especially, but there's a point where standing up to a thing doesn't mean you should do the exact things it did. It was a solid first attempt at an RPG Yakuza, and I really need to play 8 because I hear it fixes a lot of the issues, but oh boy. I can tell that'll also be a nightmare for completion. Getting back to the game, though, the later part of this level is a giant room where you have to fly the owl around, and there's a room you have to go hit a switch in to swap some blocks around. But when you do that, there's another room along the way you can go to get some coins, and I believe I did go in there. But once you do that, you need to make an entire loop around the room again to get to where the actual location you need to go is. And on a first playthrough, I think it is easy enough to overlook where you actually need to go here. But if memory serves in my first playthrough, I was wandering about for a good 3 to 4 minutes, which, in retrospect, a little silly. Because compared to later games, each level design in this game is just condensed enough where there's not many places you can go. But for some reason, I just wasn't paying attention to the level layout and missed that corridor to the top left we just passed by. Honestly, on a first playthrough, it's not even funny how many times I make that exact same type of mistake, because I assume it's going to be in the other state for reasons in one way or another. Honestly, it's surprising because of that Metroid is a series that I can just kind of blaze through on a first playthrough. I don't know why, maybe it's because I just was ingrained with that at a younger age, like, just to look for the secrets in a different way in those games, but I seldom have that exact issue there. Once you're up here at the top of this room, though, you're done with the level. You don't even need to go for those coins. From here, though, we go on to alternate Final Chapter 1's third story, which I believe is titled The Way to Open the Door. This is one of the more unique, structured levels in the game. It's kind of similar to the one from, I think it was Alternate Story 1, Alternate Chapter 1, rather, where we had, like, the branching pathways. the way this level's laid out is that there's a main room with doors numbered 1 through 5. At the start here, only door 5 is open. You enter the room, you see that we're at the gold door already, but we can't enter it because the blocks aren't in the right state, so we need to find a switch. But when we go back to the main room, door 5 will now be closed, but a different door set will be open. Effectively, what you're doing here is making your way through a door maze where the doors themselves sort of act as a lock combination to find the switch that'll swap the block states, and then you need to feel your way back around to get to that room. There's something about this I really like. With that said, it's easy to get kind of, not lost or overwhelmed because the rooms are very limited, but I suppose it's easy to just flail about entering whichever room you see first and getting lost in the layers of which room opens which room in that regard. Especially if you don't check every single door to see which ones are open. I would recommend just entering this room and then leaving it, by the way, until you have the block state swapped, as getting past these enemies takes a while and you can't get every coin in here until the block state is swapped anyway, which is largely true of the rooms, but this one especially so. Hence why I sped that up. You could make it go a little faster, of course, by actually using the zombie status, which I don't remember to do until my actual trip through there, but keep that in mind all the same. Tell you what, though, one of the easier to find treasure rooms is actually in this specific level, because it's just in room 3 here. You don't really need to do anything to open it, you just need to go over to it and you're good to go. Which I guess makes sense, considering the rest of this stage is effectively just a giant puzzle to begin with, so having it be part of the solution just makes sense structurally in that regard. With that said, though, the way I structure this LP-wise is that once we get to where the switch is, I do go back for all the coins in the rooms we've already been to, and just to save on time, because it's literally the same level design we saw before, just me going for extra coins, I do speed that entire process up, as that'll just be easier on all of us, I think. Our actual goal in this level to find the block switch is in room 2, so once you're in here, we just gotta get past where this ghost is and get past the blue jays coming up here, which you can just kind of hit stun through to begin with. Although crouch jumping is the actual way meant to get through that. And now we can just head back to room 5 once we hit this switch. But like I said, I got a lot of other coins I'm gonna go grab for literally no reason at this point, really. So once I go into this door, it's time to speed up through the other rooms again. I really would recommend just going to the end of the level by entering and re-exiting rooms, just to get through pretty quickly, but I guess in my head, again, I'm stuck in that mode of I need to show off as much of this game as possible, so, Notably, I am speeding this up a lot faster than I usually do for the mini-games, just because it's the same stuff we've already seen before for some extra money. But once we get over to room 2, we want to go through room 4, exit, and then room 5 is now open, so we can hit the gold door and finish this level off. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 14, we're gonna go finish off alternate final chapter 1 before seeing its ending and probably moving on to alternate final chapter 2. See you guys then.